Hello and welcome to RotD Review of the Day, and happy December. If you can't tell by the intro, I will be doing an advent calendar of horror movie reviews. All through between now and December 25th, I will be reviewing Christmas horror movies. And if you think that there aren't enough Christmas horror movies out there, buckle up, because I guarantee I have at least enough to do this year, possibly next year as well. And we start with 2017's The Elf. I wish I could say that we're starting on a strong note, but we're not. This movie was pretty terrible, and I heartily recommend against watching it. Just bad all around. I saw the box art. The box art looked pretty good. If you can't tell, I have a strong love for Christmas. It's one of my favorite times of the year, much to my roommates and girlfriend's chagrin. One of the more difficult aspects of my life around this time is to keep them sugar plums from dancing in my head too awful early. But it is December 1st now, and I say game on. So when I saw the box art, I was thinking, yes, this looks great. Elf on a Shelf, or at least a variation of it that doesn't breach any licensing franchise, copyrights or anything. Okay, fine. Elf on a Shelf. We're going to make a slasher horror movie about it. I'm on board. I'm game. Let's watch it. It's terrible. It was absolutely not worth watching. And for all the reasons of that, let's get into the details of the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot of this one, I gave a 4 out of 25. This follows the characters of Victoria and Nick, who start out in an old toy shop that looks more like a Goodwill store or just a general antique store. And what they're doing there, we don't know. They don't really... there's one consistent theme throughout this entire movie, and that's they go through extraordinary lengths to have as awkward of exposition as possible, getting on the cell phone to discuss what they're doing in gruesome, in excruciating detail, while at the same time somehow managing to not actually relay any valuable information to the audience. That was a very, very consistent theme. So even though, yes, they had very ham-fisted dialogue throughout, and what they were doing in the toy store, yes, they talked to each other about. The character of Victoria got on the phone with her best friend and was discussing the toy store and the people there and what they were doing-ish. But at the same time, I walked away from it not knowing at all what they were doing there, why they were there, what they were looking for, to what end, to what purpose. They seem to have a history there. What was it? I don't know. So even though they just had this terrible, terrible amount of exposition, I walked away with very little information. But regardless, Nick does happen across a chest, which does happen to have the elf in it and some scraps of paper. With just some really vague stanzas in it, just I guess what you would call general instructions along with a naughty list. And that's another thing about this movie is it seems to have a fairly strong lore to it, but I have no idea what it was. This was very bad about explaining anything in regards to what the characters were doing, what the lore was, what the mythos was, what the history was, anything about anything. It covered a lot of it, but not in any way that we were actually able to make it coherent. And as you might expect, in the chest, the elf, and the elf then starts going on a bit of a rampage. It follows him home, and it just goes on from there. Victoria brings her family along in an unexpected twist and surprise to Nick, who has some sort of trauma related to Christmas that he doesn't discuss with her, but at the same time says, I haven't held anything back from you, when it turns out he held a lot back from her. This was just really delivered poorly. Whatever plot there was sparse and poorly managed, and what we wound up on the screen was just a mess. And the only thing that could really even save it is to have some fun with the kills, to have, okay, we're going to have a bad movie, we'll at least have the elf on a shelf run around and have some creative kills. And it didn't really even have that. So yeah, 4 out of 25. The intent, I gave a 0. This wasn't scary in the slightest. It wasn't interesting in the slightest. The characters were terrible. The dialogue was worse than terrible. And like I said, it doesn't even have any fun kills to make up for it. No real gore to be had. Nothing of any real note, at the very least. The kills were just kind of meh, and a lot of them happened even off screen and just were implied. What did happen on screen was just kind of meh. So this, I can't help but think that what it was trying to do, it just flat out failed at. The acting, I gave a 5 out of 25, and that was mostly just participatory points. This was, it wasn't just badly written dialogue, it was also delivered poorly. And that is, I think, both the fault of the actors and the editing room. So I'm going to get into that with the technical, but even so, the delivery of it was just terrible. They didn't know how to talk to each other in any natural fashion, and it showed. They were remembering their lines instead of speaking dialogue, and it really came through. And the technical, I gave a 3 out of 25. The camera work, the gore, the makeup were all pretty cheesy and sparse, and just nothing about it worked. The sound design was bad, and the editing was terrible. A lot of the speech patterns that made this seem so clumsy and awkward could have been fixed or cleaned up in the editing room, but it just wasn't. Things as easy to repair as a cell phone conversation where every time the camera cuts to one side or the other, one person talks, hey, how's it going? Then it cuts to the next side, and there's a good 2-3 second pregnant pause there, so it winds up looking, hey, how you doing? I'm fine, and how are you? It's just very, very clumsy and awkward, and even if it's delivered poorly, even if it's written poorly, it could at least be snapped up and cleaned up in the editing room. So that's just one example of 1,000 that really makes this movie quite terrible. So that gives us a total score of 12 out of 100 points, and yeah. We start out this advent calendar of Christmas horror movies with a real stinker, and I think tomorrow I am going to purposefully review the 2015 Krampus movie just so that we can elevate this a bit more and start coming up on a high note. So that should about do it for The Elf 2017. I thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.